So I wanted to continue our conversation on what we were talking about earlier, primarily because I feel like this is something that actually could benefit a lot of folks here in the room, and it's playing around with getting different data types into the platform and then manipulating and controlling that data as well. I feel like this could be actually a really useful thing for folks to be aware of. So we have those suricata events, and we're picking right up from where we left off. I know I kind of fast forwarded to the end right before lunch because I wanted to show you the goal, but now we're going to actually like step through the process of how to get there and what it looks like to manipulate data on ingestion inside of LimaCharlie. Look, you can spin up and play around with this data as much as you want to. And I highly recommend if you've got some arbitrary data source that's out there that you want to ingest, and I say arbitrary not in that it's like esoteric or like weird or random or whatever, but basically if it's something that's not listed in that logo platform, that list of logos, and you're like, oh, I don't know if LimaCharlie supports this thing. I promise you 100% we do. But it's more about getting the data in a way that you can work with it. This is also going to lead towards our next module, which is going to talk about like detection and response and whatnot. But we need to get our data in and formatted the right way first. So I was playing around with it earlier, so you might see some remnants of me having it in there. But just to kind of refresh, we wanted to ingest suricata logs. And I went through and I created this suricata installation key. I just realized these are all panels. This is actually pretty cool. I created this suricata installation key, which is going to be our test key that we're using to bring this data in. And where we kind of left off was playing around with a LimaCharlie adapter, which is that binary that allows me to send data in to the platform. Now, if I just run the adapter by itself, it's actually going to come back and give me a ridiculous amount of unmanageable output. And I only say unmanageable because my terminal sometimes run out of space with it. But it's going to come back and it's going to say, hey, I am a LimaCharlie adapter. There are different ways you can run me. For every single data type that you want to ingest, here's all the different options that I support for them, right? Now, unfortunately, they're like attack H will actually take those away for you. But if I just, and even if I do tac help, does the exact same thing. But if I just simply run it, it comes back and it says, here's all the different types, the different ingestion mechanisms, right? So we're not talking about data types. We're talking about ways to get data in. Here's all the different ingestion mechanisms I have, and here's all the different options available for them. The other place where we left off was for this file adapter that I've got listed right here. For every single one of these options, we could, if we wanted to, provide it as a command line argument. It is very unruly and it's very difficult to deal with that. So instead, what we can do is, and where we left off was creating that YAML file to kind of contain my configurations for me. I'm going to pause there, and that obviously is very beneficial for a few reasons. Number one, if I need to wash, rinse, and repeat this process on any other system, I don't want to copy paste this super long ass command string. I would rather say, here's the adapter binary, here's the YAML file, you're good to go. Done. One. Two, much easier to change and maintain settings. I don't know how many of you have had to skip through command line parameters inside of the command line itself, but if you've got, 15 or 20 of them, it's not really that much fun to work with. Three, it makes it easier to go through and test if you need to as well. And notice when we get into the dot nomenclature here, that's kind of going to be your hierarchy of YAML. So client options, subcategory, identity, sub OID. Client options, sub identity, sub installation key, so on and so forth. On the surface, and I've got this one right here. There we go. Let me just back up, do that again just to make it easier. Here we go. This is the basic configuration. I've got my identity, which is knocking on the door. Hey, let me in. Here's my OID. Here's my installation key. I'm sending you JSON data, and here's the file of JSON that comes with it, my alerts file. If I go ahead and run this right here, right now, right? I'll show you all what's going to happen. I'm going to specify a couple of things. Suricata.yaml. So my command line reads, hey, LimaCharlie adapter, you are going to be ingesting via file, which means you're going to be monitoring a local file, and here's the config for that thing. We're off into the races. Now, for any of you who have ever run an adapter and come back and said, Matt, I don't know if this thing is working, if it looks like that on the bottom, it's working. You're good. If I got that super long output of text that said, here's all the options, that's a really polite way of saying you clearly don't know how to configure this, so here's all the configuration options. right? And I'm just being a little cheeky and tongue and foot here. That's not actually what we meant. But nonetheless, coming down this way, I can see all the options, I can see the config that's in use, and I can see the sensor essentially checking in, right? Now, I'm not going to say unfortunately, I'm going to say fortunately, there is no stream in here, which is like processing this file, processing that file, or whatever. The configuration simply says, I want you to look at this file, and if it comes back here, we're good to go, and it's done. Brings in my different configurations. If I hop over to my sensors list, and we're going to make this easy, I'm just going to type in this, you'll notice that I've got a couple of, there's all of my EDR sensors, my Linux EDR sensors. And I should, hopefully, assuming it's working, I hope I didn't make a change somewhere. Give me one sec. Let me refresh this just in case. And assuming this thing is checking in, you're now going to notice I've got an additional sensor in there. So that LC Labs Ubuntu 01, I've got that repeated twice, but take a look at my different tags off to the side. You can clearly see which one is Suricata and which one is an EDR sensor. By the way, the one that says compromised at the bottom isn't actually compromised. I was just playing around with tags earlier. But nonetheless, you can see that even though I've got the same sensor in there, what feels like twice, there's different tags associated with it. Well, when you kick off an adapter on a particular system, if I don't tell the adapter configuration anything about the host name, it immediately takes the host name of the system that it's in. That's going to be your first thing to remember, number one. Number two, when we jump in here, you'll see that the, oddly enough, and this sounds kind of weird, you'll see if I hover over the icon for this thing, it's not a penguin. It actually specifies a JSON USP adapter. Now, if we drill in, I can hop over to my timeline, and boom, there's all my Suricata data brought in. Now, you notice I told the platform this is JSON. I didn't specify anything else about the data type. I just simply said this is JSON data, but take a look. There it is, all dropped in. Nicely parsed, represented inside of my LimaCharlie platform. There we go, good to go. I might want to change a few things about this. Number one, it's really confusing to me to have two hosts in here with the exact same name. It makes it really difficult to filter down. Now here's the funny part about it. This is purely aesthetic. To the LimaCharlie platform, there is no confusion to the platform about, whoa, which one is the EDR, which one is this? The EDR events are still flowing into the EDR sensor. The Suricata data is still flowing into the Suricata one. So a lot of stuff that we're about to make changes to, it's purely superficial for our purposes to make it a little bit easier. So the first thing I might want to say is I might want to say, I don't really want this host name to be the same thing. I'm going to change it to be something a little bit easier for me to figure out. So the way that we do that is I'm going to hop over into here, and I'm hoping this is going to be the right one. We're going to grab this. There it is. Perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into our Suricata config, and let me see. There we go. I'm using Nano again. Say whatever you want. But inside of my configuration right here, under Client Options, I have the ability to insert a hostname field. That's not how you spell hostname. That's how you spell hostname. And I might just simply say, these are Suricata alerts. I'm going to save that, but before I do, let's walk through it really quick. There's my identity information. There's my platform declaration. There's my sensor seed key. That's going to keep it to be the same seed, and I've got my file path in there. I'm going to save it, and let's rerun it again just to see what happens. I'm hoping this worked, but this is what testing is. We try, fail, try, keep going until something happens. We're going to hop over in here to our platform again. I'm going to refresh my sensors list, and that's going to remove all the filters and everything that I've dropped in. And if I hop here, you'll notice I've now got a Suricata alerts sensor. Now, there is going to be a history of that text-based Ubuntu 01, but this is the live active sensor that corresponds to this adapter right now. So that host name declaration allowed me to change the way it's represented in the platform. And if you don't believe me, I'll just scroll over. You can see that my tags are still the same. Those are tied to my installation key. Everything routes back to how I wanted this all set up in the very beginning. But let's pause on that for just a moment. Look how useful this is, that installation key carries across with me. No matter what I do to this adapter, those tags stay there. So if I'm going through and I'm making changes and I'm moving names around, changing seed keys, so on and so forth, but the NDR tag is still something that we're actioning on, none of that goes away. It all stays present inside of the platform. I'm just, again, changing around some of the superficial details of this. If I zoom in, and we'll see, there's my events once again. So all we did was we just changed the representation or the host name of this particular sensor. Now, anyone else see anything boring about this? The fact that they all say JSON is the part that could be a little bit boring for a couple of reasons. One, well, that's just a data type. That's not really a what happened in here, number one. Two, when we talk about detection and response rules a few minutes from now, we're going to talk about walking through these events, and how you write detection and response rules is you essentially walk through the JSON of this data, and then you tell LimaCharlie, hey, if this particular event matches a certain thing, we're going to call that a detection, and we're going to want to respond to that. So hypothetically over here, I might say if the application protocol, so if the app underscore proto equals HTTP, I want you to do a thing, fire a detection, right? That's the field that I'm going to be interested in. However, I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say that most people are probably more interested in this right here, or this right here, or this field right here, or something like that. Because it's a Suricata alert. Let's think about that telemetry source that we're bringing in. Is Suricata alerts telemetry or meta-telemetry? It's a meta-telemetry. They're events, or they're alerts about events that have already happened. The cool thing when you deal with these types of meta-telemetry things is there's an inherent fidelity with them. I'm not analyzing signal from network. I'm analyzing analyzed signal from network, which means it comes in with a higher fidelity. Suricata has already determined that this matches a rule pattern in its database, so therefore it considered it significant in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean it's inherently bad. It doesn't mean I'm going to trust Suricata implicitly. But what it does mean is this is not a process event that I have to determine if it's good or bad. I'm going to want to zoom in on some of the different details here. So for example, I might be interested in that category. And I might say, I don't want this dashboard to just be JSON, 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 JSON. I want it to actually be web application attack. Or let's see, is there anything other than web application attack? Access to a potentially vulnerable web application seems like a really long category to have. But there we go, generic protocol command decode. That sounds relatively generic, as I guess it's supposed to. But my point is, when you're bringing your data in, the field that you want to have represented in the dashboard is, again, going to be a superficial thing. So rather than my analyst scrolling through and just seeing JSON everywhere, I might want to give them the ability to see the category. That way they can scroll through and they can say, oh, web application attack, attempted information leak, so on and so forth. Where the other area where that's going to matter is if I change the event type, meaning this brown, goldish, reddish column right here, that's my event type. If I change that to some other field, it's also going to change the way I write detection and response rules. Let me show you what I mean by using EDR events. Just in case anybody's not following, I don't want to say lost, but wants to follow along better. Let's take a look at EDR telemetry. Let's zoom in on like a really kind of spotty window of a bunch of stuff happening if I have one of those on this system. This kind of works. There we go. So notice right here, I've got things like terminate process, new process, network connections, DNS request, cloud notification. That's my event type. That's the field that when I write a DNR rule says, this is the type of thing that's happening. Everything else drills into that event, but that's my starting, that's my top-down approach. For me to customize that field for arbitrary data makes it easier to write detection and response rules. Now, we're not going to do this in the platform. We're not going to do this in the UI. There's no place in the UI for me to right-click and be like, oh, hey, now I want you to care about this thing versus that. We're going to do that inside of the configuration. So if I hop back in to my configuration here, and I take a look again at my configuration, and because this is the food network, I've already got this built out. If I take a look at my hostname mapping, and there we go, we'll just bring this up to the top of the screen, you'll notice that we now get into this additional category here called mapping. Now, mapping is where I'm going to tell the platform, hey, I'm going to be sending you some data. Everything else stays the same. Keep the host name, keep the identity, keep the platform, it's JSON data, keep the seed key, keep the file path, none of that changes. What the mapping category does is it says to LimaCharlie, I'm going to want to change the way this data is represented or mapped inside of the UI. And this is where you can actually pull events from the data you're sending to manipulate what's shown in the UI, to manipulate the data as parsed and represented. There's a reason that this mapping dot event underscore type underscore path has two curly braces around it. This is actually a field that allows for transforms or template strings. And that's how you can either put in plain text or you can reference the field or the data that you're sending in. In this case right here, I've got these two curly braces, single quotes on either side of the entire field, and then inside, I've got inside of double quotes this suricata dash alert. Can anyone guess what this is going to do when the data gets ingested? Max, you're not allowed to answer. You want to find out? Let's see what happens. We'll go back over here, and instead of suricata, I'm going to reference the one that has the host name inside of it. We don't need YAML twice. That would just be way overkill. All right, my adapter's working. It's running, no issues. Pulling from the file, I can see the host name change. I can see the authorization. The only thing that's different that's been added in is that mapping type that's in there. So if I hop back over, you'll notice now, look how my data's changed. So all I did in the event type declaration was I changed, this thing's warm. Man, if it was a cold day, this would be nice to be up here. I'm gonna hug this wall a little bit more. You've got the ability to change this event type. That changes the way I would write a detection and response rule. I would write a detection and response rule now where my event would be suricata alert as opposed to event JSON. Here's where else that makes life a little bit easier. If I do event type equals suricata alert, what type of data does that pertain to? Anyone know? You should know it's in the name. I know, it's after lunch. I'm making you think. This is tough. What type of data is a suricata alert? Suricata data. It's data from suricata. What type of data is JSON? Anything that's out there. So by even just changing the event type to something seemingly generic, such as suricata alert, I've put an immediate filter or magnifying glass in my detection and response rules. Because now I can write detection and response rules for event equals suricata alert. And that's going to immediately zoom in on anything that comes in and is declared as a suricata alert. Now, I may have suricata alerts from a bunch of live sources. I may have a bunch of dead logs. I may have files. I may have all sorts of stuff coming in. But as long as I normalize this field on the way in, my detection and response rules are now cross-source. They can apply to anything as long as suricata is in there. This changes our approach. If we kept it, I'm going to scroll down hoping it's still there. If we kept it as that JSON field decorator, which is in there, if I write a detection and response rule, I'm going to say event type equals JSON. And then I'm going to have to walk through the JSON structure to find the field of interest. Guess what happens back on the platform? The platform's like, oh, data type equals JSON? Well, Matt's got like 60 of those in here because he's testing all kinds of stuff out. Let me evaluate all of them and see what happens. That rule becomes very unwieldy. You all notice I keep using these words like unwieldy, unruly. I don't want to have these like super select star detection and response rules in my arsenal. I want to have stuff that's filtered down and curated closer to the source that's coming in. So this is another way that you can modify this and say, I am now interested in sending in this data and normalizing it to suricata alert. Now, we can go a step further, and I'm going to hope this works. I'm going to tell you right now, this is the one thing that I reach out for help on a lot because I'm awful at memorizing this, how it works. But let's go back here, and we're going to take a look at our JSON data. Let's just say we were interested in, for some reason, I don't know, the signature field that's in here. Let's just say we were interested in that signature field as being my event type. Good idea or bad idea? Any thoughts? So it's superficial for us, but I'm curious if anyone thinks that's a smart idea or not. I know, I'm making you talk. You thought it was all cool, like Matt's just going to stand here for 3 hours and just talk to us. Not at all. I think it's a horrible idea. I'm gonna be honest with you, because that signature field is pretty easily modified. It's very heavily dependent on the person who wrote the suricata signature itself. It's very heavily dependent on the date. If you see that, it's very heavily dependent upon whether the thing is in the current events rule set or a different type of rule set. And that string, unknown malicious second stage download URI struct, probably isn't going to change much, but it might. You never know. I would say the signature field is one that I might not want to make an event type. Because if we did, and we created an event type of a field that's fairly dynamic, guess where? We're back to wildcards now. Give me any event where the event type equals star malicious second stage star, because there's so much variability in the name. Not really where we want to be. I like something like this instead. Feels a little more static, probably not being changed as much, maybe a little bit more straightforward, and I'm kind of a fan of that actually being in there. So guess what? This is where we're going to test and play around. As I mentioned before, let's see, we're going to go over here, and I'm going to jump into my mapping one. This particular curly brace inside of here means I can also reference the event that's inside of it. I can also reference the event that's being sent up. So taking a look at our JSON data, it looks like that category field is under alert.category. All right, so we got to walk through the JSON. We got to start. I'm glad that happened because it gives me a chance to say this. Everyone see this up top here? This event? That is the standard root for every event that comes in. So that's assumed that it's up there. In this case, we're going to walk our way through. There's my host name. There's my event type path.alert.category. We're going to hop back over and see if we have any changes. Scrolling up and taking a look at the data, maybe, possibly. I ran this twice, so there's going to be a bunch of stuff popping in there. Let me see. I'm now getting mixed up on the times. Gonna scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. I was playing around with this all during lunch, so there's like data being represented at different places. And boom, there we go. So there's our final representation of the data, where the actual category field, which is still represented in the data as well, is now also brought forward as the event type. So that's one way to take what is originally just a bunch of different JSON data and then actually work with the adapter configuration to say, okay, I'm going to make this the type, I'm going to change the host name, I'm going to modify these things to make it a little bit easier for my analysts. And now I can start to build a security process around this. So now I can tell my analysts, hey, hop into your list of sensors. All right, let's hop back over here. Let's zoom back out. Hop into your list of sensors. And for this one particular customer, or for our environment, that's not how you spell suricata, that's how you spell suricata. Here's how you spell suricata. I can say, run a quick filter for any sensor that has suricata in the name. And maybe this is site-based, maybe it's geographic, maybe it's sensor, maybe it's whatever. I don't know what it is. Doesn't matter. You can build a process around, look at that, jump into the timeline for those, and because we've normalized our data, my analysts can now start to look through and can now start to see exactly what's happening. And do y'all know what humans are really, really good at? We humans are really good at looking at this list. They told me I could walk off stage. We'll see if it happens. The humans are really good at looking at this list and being like, huh, that looks like a lot of web application attacks. Also, that's a lot of generic protocol command decodes happening at the same time. This is where I want my analysts at. I want them looking at like patterns of activity to see what's happening and make things a lot easier. Could you imagine like page downing through every single JSON event and trying to manually wrap your head around that? Wouldn't work very well at all. That being said, that's a way to take that adapter, that binary adapter, kind of tying these two things together. That's a way to bring in that binary adapter, an arbitrary text source, and modify your configuration to get to a point where you're at from a security perspective. Now, this can be done with any data type that's out there. So the key difference, or I should say the key contributor here, let's hop back into the configuration, is at the top, we told LimaCharlie, hey, this is going to be a file adapter, and you're bringing in JSON data, and here's all the things you need to know, and here's the modifications I'm going to make, so on and so forth. If I were to have some, again, arbitrary data source sitting inside of an S3 bucket, the only thing that changes is I tell LimaCharlie it's in an S3 bucket, Here are the S3 configuration settings you need. Everything else can stay the same. So this process of bringing in data, changing and manipulating the representation as much as you want can be done against any source that's out there. Now you might be wondering, all right, Matt, this is cool and all. Why don't you at LimaCharlie just support Suricata data? Because it would make my life a lot easier, and I'm gonna just kind of freehand this. It would make my life a lot easier if I could just do this. And I get this request all the time. And I could say, it would be a lot easier if I could just do that. And everything else was just done for me. If the category automatically moved up as the mapping, if the event type or if the host name was automatically determined to be something like Suricata alerts, like why can't I just type this and have it done? And that's where I say, you can. Just email me and we'll make it happen. And then you're all set. What happens in this point right here is we will take what you've defined as a mapping for Suricata and we'll put it in the back end as a parser. And now we're getting a little more advanced LimaCharlie stuff. We'll put it in the back end as a parser. So if you declare, I am sending you Suricata data, we will match that mapping. But I have to insert a quick caveat, and we're going to do a breakpoint on the way this gets done now. If you send me mapping for a particular data set and say, hey, Matt, I want to build out a Suricata platform. I'm tired of typing in all these configs. Can you please put this in the back end for me? The first thing I'm going to ask you is this a generic format or not? Because if you send me Matt's Suricata output, which is heavily modified, I've added my own fields, I've changed this, I changed that, that's not the world's Suricata view. That's Matt's. So therefore, that's a custom parsing. That's going to only represent your particular data, which means if I come down the road 6 months from now and another LimaCharlie user brings in Suricata data and they say, oh, I can bring in Suricata stuff, this is perfect. That's actually not the same format. It's not in the same template. So any data source that we've built out from a platform perspective is going to match the generic custom parsing the generic format that's out there. If you have something that is custom, meaning you've got combined data fields, or you're working with a customer, or you're working in an environment where the output from that thing is its own kind of modified value, which happens all the time. I see this in weblogs a lot. There's a standard IIS format, there's IIS extended, there's Apache and Apache extended. Nginx usually follows Apache and Apache extended. Those are standardized formats that are out there and that are well known. However, if you're like, oh, well, I combined bytes in and bytes out, and I don't have a user agent field because I don't see value in it, blah, 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 can you guys map this out? You've got a custom format. So custom formats tend to be something that you'll have to configure and build on your own. But if you have something that's standardized and you'd like to get in, we can easily drop that in. I will not name names, but I will, and I won't look in the direction, but I will just say there are some folks in this room who have added a lot of different parsers into the back end for us. Those are data types. The ingestion mechanism is the same, but it's the parsing data type on the back end. So when you look at, come on. What's funny is as soon as I said that, they knew exactly who they were. I'm not going to mention any names, but I know you know. All these different data types that are in here, these are parsers on the back end. These are, we understand how that format comes in. We have the ability to parse and normalize it for you. Is the sun coming out? Did I see that right? Looks like the sun's coming out. Hopefully y'all will wake up now. But what that means is we understand the format. We've got a parser built out, so you can simply say platform equals Okta. Platform equals Azure Event Hub or Azure whatever. Platform equals IT Glue, and then you're in. Make sense? All right, those are adapters. That's getting data in. Now we've got data in. This part's fun. Now we got to do something with it. So the next thing we'll get into, as kind of like our getting familiar with LimaCharlie training, is going to be taking a look at the detection and response capability. But with that said, let's get into detection and response capabilities. And I'm going to call this advanced detection and response capabilities because we're not just going to talk about detecting on events. I want to talk about some of the other things that you can detect on as well. So getting telemetry into the platform is like step one. I need the fuel for the engine to actually work. However, once it's in, there's a whole bunch of, oh, a question? Yeah. Oh my gosh, my first question.
Do you mind if I ask a question on the previous stuff? So
yes,
you showed us a YAML file for a local adapter.
Yes.
If we're using one of the LimaCharlie hosted adapters, presumably that's just a config or change in the org config, or?
What do you mean, sorry?
So the infrastructure's code page, I
Yep.
think it is. If you wanted to do this for one of your hosted JSON adapters, for example, you'd presumably just change it in the YAML for the organization, yeah?
I understand what you're saying. So the question was, if we wanted to make a modification like this in I'm going to call it like a cloud-based adapter and that kind of stuff, how would we go through and make that change? If I hop into our infrastructure as code, which is what we talked about in the very beginning, hopefully everyone remembers every single word I said earlier on today. You will be quizzed on it later. You'll notice that all of the adapter settings, everything that we talked about, are represented in here as well. So for example, I've got these webhook ones. This is I wanted to zoom in. I've got a webhook adapter in here for Sublime events because I was playing around with getting that in. Take a look at that representation. Take a look at that data. Anyone recognize this format? It's the exact same thing that's inside of the YAML file as well. Exact same thing. So if I wanted to come in and make some changes in like a webhook adapter or something like that, I could do that from here as well. So yeah, there's multiple ways to go through and change it. And I appreciate that question too, because what it does, it lets me kind of circle back to what we talked about in the very beginning, which is if I wanted to go and make those changes against one organization, I could come and do that here now that I know like how the structure works and how it comes together and everything like that. But what if you had to repeat this process against like, 10, 15, 30 clients or something like that? I don't want you hopping in and out of the UI for every single one. That's a quick sed statement to replace those and then just sync them all up and you're done. If I can kind of just drill down into the scale aspect of it once again, I think it also allows you to be really versatile in the way that you handle third-party data sources. I say this a lot. I know a few of you have heard me say this before. I really don't like the way Microsoft treats their APIs and their data output options. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I feel like someone wakes up and is like, there's only 50 JSON fields here. We need 75. Can someone go 25 more? And then tomorrow there's 25 new fields. And it's like, what is all this stuff? And then the API endpoint changes, the access control changes, the things that you needed in Azure changed. Oh, and by the way, that one API resource, yeah, that thing's no longer there. We moved it all over here, and it just happened one day. It's kind of humorous, but at the same time, like I'm being very serious about this too. Sometimes they make these changes, and I really don't appreciate when they do that, because then I get the messages which are like, hey, this is broken, this is broken, this is broken. I'm like, oh, look at that. All of Microsoft's documentation was updated last night. Wonder what that means. But if you have multiple customers and it's just one quick line change across the board, boom, everything's fixed and you're up and running. So one of the things that like I view from a streaming perspective is it makes it really easy to handle that from a scale if there are changes that are made as well. And someone earlier said makes it easier to change vendors and stuff like that. Another way to go about it as well. But nonetheless, good question. And yeah, easily changed here in the YAML if you need to. And then that way you can also play with it here if you want. For the binary adapters, obviously you'll want to change the config on disk because it's the re-ingestion of the files that's going to trigger those new changes. So let me just quantify that for everyone. The specific question was about addressing kind of cloud-based, cloud connector adapters, ones that you would build here in the UI. That's going to obviously work for events going forward from when you make that change. It's not going to be retroactive. So if I were to make a change, for example, to a Suricata cloud connector that I had, the platform's not going to go back in time and be like, oh, these alert events were actually supposed to be category. Let's go ahead and make that change, right? It's going to be from a point in time going forward as to when those changes are being made. Everyone follow me on that one? Okay. All right, cool. Good question. My first question. All right, so moving on. I apparently made another mistake here, but that's okay. It's all right. We're done playing around with Suricata. Moving into detection and response capabilities. So we've got gas in the car, or petrol for some of you in the room. We've got it in the car, and now we're going to work on building detection and response rules. Detection and response rules, in a nutshell, is I'm interested in a thing. When that thing happens, LimaCharlie, I want you to tell me when that thing happens, okay? That's all a detection and response rule is. I try to tell you, that question applies to any part of your environment that you want it to. Because when a lot of people think about security detection and response, they think about what? Malware, bad guys, attackers, things doing a thing. Oh, if it's an alert, it must be bad. What if your job is asset control? Wouldn't you like to know when a new system comes online? Is that inherently malicious? No, but is it a question that you're going to ask of your environment? Absolutely. So this is like the other paradigm shift that I have to work a lot on changing with people, and I had to work on changing it for myself as well. A detection does not mean bad. It means it's a thing you're interested in. Now, it could be bad, 100%, could be. Some of you have seen me give this example before, but I'm gonna use it here just because it's built out and it makes life a lot easier, all right? I've got 2 detection and response rules. Here's the first one. Let's just look through this one really quick. All right, this one looks for a user process, dropping an exe or a DLL or spawning a command prompt or a PowerShell prompt in Windows. That's the high level of it. To break it down and walk through it, it starts with our event. See the top, those new process or existing process events? That's that brown column field I was pointing at earlier. That's that event type. Can you imagine if this just said this? How boring that would be? Oh, that's awful. I hope I can control. Okay, good. Whew. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to undo that one. All right. So then what we're doing is we're going through. See, that is Windows. There's my platform declaration. So now everything's coming full circle. There's my platform declaration that says, I want you to look at Windows systems for this particular thing. So there's my first magnifying glass. We took care of all of that way back when we installed those sensors. Is Windows, is Linux, is Mac, is whatever. We built that out there. Then we get into the actual thing that we're looking for. So this is a regex rule. Notice the RE. And we're looking for processes named either WinWord, Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, iExplorer, Firefox, Chrome, or Acro Read 32, which are all user-based applications. I just read that for the first time off the cuff. And we're looking for instances where they spawn a command prompt, a PowerShell prompt, or they drop a DLL, exe, BAT, or PS1 file on the disk. I promise you all right here, right now, 98.9% of the time, this is going to be malware. 0.01% or 1.1% of the time, this is probably going to be a government agency doing something legitimate. No offense to anybody, but I'm just saying, this happens a lot. And usually it's malicious. And then there's that 1% use case, which is no, that's actually how we do business. And I'm like, okay. Do y'all remember when Microsoft tried to disable macros in Office applications by default, and then that decision was eerily reversed, and everyone in security was like, why on earth would you reverse that? Someone who spends a lot of money came up and said, we use that. And they were like, got it, cool. Revenue always wins. Anyways, this rule, probably malicious if something happens, right? That is a question. Yeah.
I'm wondering about change controls in regards to YAML rules and whatnot. If this changes, is there anything that keeps track of that?
So we will get there from a conceptual perspective, but I will just say there is an ability down here to drop in different comments and tags and stuff like that. And I'm going to say I'm going to probably put more of that onus on the users and the detection engineers and stuff. Inside of the platform, I don't have a version history here, except if I expand this guy right here, I've got dates of when it was updated and who did what and everything, but I don't have a restore to previous version.
Well, that begs the question, if we sync up the rules, the YAML rules, on a GitHub repository where we can keep those notes, comments, is that possible?
100%.
Cool.
You're 20 minutes ahead of me, which is good. Yes. Yes. You definitely can. We'll come back to that. We'll definitely come back to that topic, but that's something important to keep in mind. There's some other things that are built into the platform too. You can see analytics for these rules and whatnot, but I want to focus on the content for right now, not the response part of it, just the detection part. That's what it's looking for. As I mentioned, this is a question that you have for your environment. Now, a lot of you may not think of security in this way because a lot of folks, and I'm not saying this room, but a lot of times we just go and we install the sensor, we wait for the detections to come up, and we don't really think about what's happening. Oh, that's bad because it's red and critical is 1. I need to respond to it, okay? But, and I was told at lunch, I'm not a former incident responder, I'm an incident responder, and I really appreciated that comment. Thank you. But as an incident responder, we ask a lot of questions, right? So detection and response gives you a chance to ask questions. Is there an instance of a user application spawning a command prompt? Because that would be irregular. That would not be normal. I want to know if that particular thing happens. This is a bad guy question, right? Now, there's another rule that I like to use a lot as an example as well, and I'm going to hopefully use it here. We're going to see. Here we go. All right, this rule is an interesting one. So let's start with the events at the top, because this is a really quick opposite type of rule to what we've normally seen. Take a look at those two events at the top. Can anyone guess what type of data this probably is? Why do you say GitHub? Git, and then look at my platform as well. My platform declaration is also there, but then the events are git clone, git.push, and then there's a qualifier in here which says, is the repository public? It's not, right? And then I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for instances of where the actor location, the person who did the thing, is outside of the US or Canada. In short, I'm looking for clone or push events against private repositories from someone who's outside of the US or Canada. Inherently, that's not malicious. However, that's a question I'd like to ask of my environment. Maybe I don't want anybody outside of the US or Canada touching my data. Again, private repositories. So there's a lot of assumptions based in the background. If you're messing with a private repository, the assumption is you already have access to do that. We'd hope. It's already been locked down. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing that's happened. It's just an indicator. But it's a question that I have of my environment. Now let's look at the other security process. And here's where I start to blend the lines between these two things. When a lot of folks think of threat hunting, they think of asking questions of your environment for things that don't make sense. This right here is a threat hunting question. Has anyone accessed my GitHub environment from outside of these approved countries that I have in mind? And I'd be like, yeah, you could go to GitHub and dump the logs and drop them into Excel, and you could perform your own geolocation, and you could look them up all the time if you wanted to, or you can let LimaCharlie just do it for you. Because guess what? This data is being streamed in, it's going to be analyzed and detected on in real time. And I know that was like kind of buzzwordy, but nonetheless, we'll leave that off to the side and say, this is a question that I have of my environment. This is a thing that I'm going to ask it. So when we write detection and response rules, we don't want to think, all right, how do I go through and detect bad guys doing bad things? I instead want you to say, what are some questions that I might have of my environment? That's like the first introduction. And then you get into just like basic stuff, right? Like a process named evil.exe. I love Eric Capuano. This is looking for a process called evil.exe, and this one's really straightforward and simple. This is like the example that you would see in like textbooks, right? If a textbook was ever written about LimaCharlie's detection and response rules, Chris, side project, if a textbook was ever written about this, this is the type of basic stuff you would see. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this type of detection right here? Come on, we're going to make you all detection engineers. Yeah, it's too narrow. If you change the name of the EXE, it doesn't really do much, right? Some yokel out there will tell you that that's not an L at the end of evil. It's actually a Unicode 1, and you might not know, and that kind of stuff. But my point is, like, I like to use this as another example for detection engineering. When you write detection and response rules, the more narrow or the more concentrated that magnifying glass is, the more chances the adversaries have to obviously back away or not get caught by it as well. Now, we do expand a little bit here. We do drop in an OR parameter that says if the file is named evil.exe or if the command line contains evil.exe. That's kind of a way of like expanding to both sides and be like, well, maybe they changed the name, but the command path will still have it in there, right? That's one way of going through it. But again, it just kind of depends on like what we write from a detection perspective. Now, while we're on the topic of detection and response and observable telemetry and things like that, I want to bring to light something that we talked about earlier and mention what it means to be observable telemetry inside LimaCharlie. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our Suricata alerts in there. That adapter is still running strong, waiting for new data from 9 years ago to be dropped in. I've got my Linux sensors that are running, and then I've got all these other extensions in here. In this organization, in this tenant that we're looking at, I have Velociraptor turned on, I have Yara Manager, I have Yara, and I have Atomic Red Team inside of this window. Oh, I also have Payload Manager on. Man, this thing is scratchy if you hit it the wrong way. I've also got Payload Manager turned on. If I scroll up or down, you'll see I've also got a few other extensions turned on as well. I'm going to pick on binlib as one in just a moment here. But just a quick reminder, if you ever see ext-, that is a LimaCharlie specific sensor that is tied to an extension that you've enabled. Quick billing answer, no, that does not count against your quota, Just wanted to drop that in there. I don't think, right? Emmerich, it still doesn't? Okay, good. Just making sure we didn't change that overnight. You never know. Just kidding. We wouldn't ever do that. But when we talk about observable telemetry, there's our EDR agents, number 1. There's our logs, our third-party sources, 2. 3, there's these extensions. So in the spirit of observability, every single extension that you enable itself has its own sensor. Everything that extension does is also observable, which means you can write rules against that activity as well. I did not want that to come up. I don't know how we got there. We're going to zoom out, and we're going to hop here into binlib activity. Now, while we're on the topic and letting it load, binlib, or binary library, is a cool little extension inside of LimaCharlie. Anyone here know what binlib does, or how it works? What's it do?
Tells you what binaries to run on the system, captures metadata around them, and lets you query it later on.
Ah, you're missing one part. 100% right, minus one part. You're right. Binary library. Remember earlier when I walked through those code_identity events? That little magnifying glass that is like, ooh, new binary. Here's the metadata for that thing. You're right. Binlib captures and uses those code identity events to grab all of that metadata and store it inside of this separate stream right here. The only part that you are missing, it also grabs the binary if it's new. It also grabs a copy of the data itself if it's new. And what binlib does is binlib actually comes in and you get a list of all the events associated with binlib. Hey, here's a bunch of things that I've never seen before. We're going to call those first seen. Guess what I did right before lunch, everyone? I installed Nano so I could use it as a text editor, right? That's how basic I am. But that's me. I actually wanted to generate this event. That's me grabbing and installing Nano. I did apt install on my Ubuntu system, and there it is. It had never seen this binary before. It didn't need to grab a copy of it because I have it in my other systems inside of this same tenant. I have it in there, but it went and it grabbed a copy and it brought it down. And it said, hey, this is the first time we've seen this thing on this particular system. And there's some other binaries that are acquired here. And then there's some other first scenes, such as, does it need to actually acquire this thing? It's a brand new binary. It's never been seen before. Can anyone take a guess as to what I did right around here? All these first scenes and these acquireds. Anyone have any ideas of what I might have done? You see this happen in Windows a lot, where you see like hundreds of thousands of events at the same time. I ran apt get upgrade. And I simply said, if you have any outdated binaries or any outdated packages on the system, upgrade them. And it went and it did that. And binlib was watching like a really weird voyeur. And it was like, here we go. Bunch of new binaries, bunch of new binaries, bunch of new binaries. Do I need it? Grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it. And it just went through and acquired all these different things because it had never seen them before. But it's building this library in the background of all of these different things that I'm installing on the system. And we'll talk about that extension when we get to the extensions part a little bit later. But here's this really cool option. But we're not here to talk about binlib itself. We're here to talk about these events. This column right here, everything that binlib does is itself an observable event. So let's just say, hypothetically, I wanted to use binlib as some sort of CTI platform. Now, this sounds weird because LimaCharlie is not a tip at all. However, if I wanted to start to be like, I want to keep track of all the different binaries that are being seen inside of my environment, and I want to start to kind of build my own little private virus total repository or something like that, what types of events can I use to pivot on whenever a binary is seen or whenever a binary is acquired? Well, you could write a detection and response rule for every EDR sensor and say, every single time you see a file, let me know. But binlib's already doing that work for you. In fact, binlib is primarily a collection of detection and response rules pulling files up for you. That's what it's designed to do. So you can tap into this stream as well. Same exact thing with any other extension I've got in here. Let's just say, hypothetically, there it is. They move around. I need to work on like a static alphabetical field or something like that. But we'll pick on Velociraptor as well. Yeah, I know. There's only a few events in here. My Velociraptor instance is not as busy as others. I don't need it. I'm that good. I'm just kidding. Nonetheless, here's Velociraptor. Hopefully y'all are familiar with Velociraptor. We'll talk about what it is a little bit later. But Velociraptor running as a more advanced deeper tool. Here's the 4 steps of Velociraptor working. Hey, Velociraptor, I need you to go grab a thing for me. And it's like, all right, job created, artifact generated, artifact uploaded, Here's the actual data that you have. That's the walkthrough of what happened during that 8 seconds of activity there, right? That is every observable step of Velociraptor doing what Velociraptor is supposed to do. Behind the scenes, this is just a combination of payloads, DNR rules, artifact collection, all just working in unison together. Okay, this is like the ultimate automation. It's a meta task, if you will, because we're simply using the pieces of LimaCharlie and constructing them together for you. But what it lets me do as an analyst writing detection and response rules is it lets me zoom in and say, I want to see this event, and this event, and this, and then finally this. And I can drill into this further. And as I mentioned before, if it's, and I'll just keep this rule simple, if it's on the right side of the screen, it's observable in a detection and response rule. I can write a rule against it that says, show me anything out there. So let's go back to my original kind of genesis with all this. What types of questions might you want to ask of your environment? You might want to ask things like, is a piece of malware running? Is this bad thing there? Has this happened? Has that happened? But you might want to also ask questions such as, how many of you are running log4j? How many of you are doing this thing? How many of you are doing that thing? And those are questions you'd ask of your environment. Well, if I've got the ability to collect all of that, and I've got the ability to simply just list it all, and then I've got the ability to make it actionable, and I've got the ability to detect against it, I can now start to collect that in like a funneled up fashion. So if I wanted to go kind of to the extreme with this example, I don't know why I would do this. I'm going to pick something a little bit better. Let's say I'm interested in everyone who's got, here, this version of binutils installed, right? Come on, get out of the way. Let's say I'm interested in every system that has installed an AMD 64 version of binutils, that second package down. How would I go about collecting all that information? Well, I could go and I could run all these reports manually. I could go and collect all these artifacts. I could run Velociraptor, so on and so forth. Or I could simply tell LimaCharlie, hey, I'm interested in anyone who has this thing. Run Velociraptor, run this minimal collection. If that collection result, if the event Velociraptor collection includes the package name of binutils and includes the version 2.38.4 Ubuntu 2.6, throw a detection, aka fire an alert. Doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's another question I'm simply asking of my environment. So I like to insert little things like this and be like, because it's actionable and observable, I can change it into something I'm interested in. And I might want to drill a little bit further. And you can wash, rinse, and repeat that across anything you might want to do. I'm using Velociraptor in this case to list packages on my Debian system. But if I use it as a defer tool to enumerate like process execution history, users logged in, installed applications or something, the same type of detection logic could apply. All right, we're going to pause there.